Good afternoon. Welcome to the Wilson Center. I'm Jane Harmon, the president and CEO, and very proud of the programming we do here, and extremely proud of this program. Many of us came into this room from a lunch. Some of the smartest people on U.S. Russia issues are sitting in the front several rows, and they had a smaller conversation with Minister Ivanov, and it was enormously interesting to be part of that conversation. I was thinking about, just in my own life, some of the things that are not available to today's children that were available to mine. My daughter was in high school when the Cold War ended, and she went to Sidwell, a private school in this town, and she was part of an early summer exchange program in Moscow. And she was there for about 6 weeks, and she ate every day at McDonald's. Not my idea, her idea, which, rumor has it, is very different from the McDonald's here, and is a five-star restaurant, or was, in Moscow. So just thinking about some small things, my daughter Hillary would, right now, not be able to go to Moscow on an exchange program or eat at McDonald's, which is, so far as I know, is closed for health violations. At any rate, unique in Washington, the Wilson Center is the living memorial to our 28th president, our only PhD president, and we think that matters because of his very deep scholarship on so many issues, certainly including the Congress. We are chartered by Congress, and our intention is to frame issues, provide a trusted space for conversation about issues, and to develop and promote actionable ideas, not just for policymakers here, but for thinkers and policymakers around the world. We are very proud of the lead role that our Kennan Institute, which is 40 years old, now led by Matt Rajansky, has taken in shaping the dialogue on the topic today, U.S. Russia relations and the prospects for a better partnership. The Kennan Institute has more than 500 expert alumni located throughout the region. They're working on the toughest issues, building personal relationships and contributing, we hope, to a stronger public discussion and understanding. Today, we are very fortunate to hear from one of Russia's top foreign policy minds, to get his perspective on recent events in Ukraine, and to hear, I hope, a positive vision for how our two countries move forward. Our guest today, Igor Ivanov, was Russian foreign minister twice, first to President Yeltsin and then to President Putin. From 2004 to 2007, he was secretary of the Security Council of the Russian Federation. He also served as ambassador for the USSR in the Russian Federation and currently heads the Russian International Affairs Council, and he co-chaired the Bosnia settlement talks in Dayton, Ohio, not an easy negotiation. So his experience is vast, and we just discovered that he and I are the same age, and I'm not exactly sure what that leads to, except that we're not the youngest people in the room. My good friend Henry Kissinger, a very good friend of many here, wrote the foreword to Minister Ivanov's 2002 book called The New Russian Diplomacy. Henry warned then that troubled times were on the horizon for U.S. Russia relations. Now the bilateral relationship is in, I think most of us would agree, worse shape, possibly the worst shape it's been since the end of the Cold War. And many are asking if there's anything that the partnership between the U.S. and Russia can still achieve or even attempt to achieve. But diplomacy is about maintaining working relationships, even and especially when states don't see eye to eye. So I look forward, and I think this audience looks forward, to hearing Minister Ivanov's take on how we can confront shared challenges. Our own resident rock star scholar, Jill Dougherty, who is now a public policy scholar writing a book on Vladimir Putin, is here to ask the tough questions and get actionable answers. That's a good soundbite. You probably know her best from her years at CNN, She is totally brilliant, and obviously, if we want to get the questions asked right, we have to put a woman in charge of this panel. Please welcome Jill Dougherty.
Thank you, President Harman. I am really very glad and grateful that Jane Harman asked me to ask the questions of Igor Ivanov, as we call him, Igor Sergeyevich. I am very glad that he is the person in this trusted space that Jane referred to who's going to be answering these questions, because I covered him, in fact, for your entire tenure as the Minister of Foreign Relations, Foreign Affairs in Moscow. And I always felt, and this is really a very sincere comment, that you were very moderate, fair, a top diplomat who really understood the challenges of the relationship, but always had an idea of how things practically, on a really practical basis, could be improved. And so I'm going to ask you some questions. Maybe I'll do a TV-style question to begin, which will be very simplistic, of course, but will start us off in the right vein. I hope that really during the course of this time that we'll feature questions from the audience as well, that we can get to something that's useful and could maybe spark some improvement in the relationship, which at this point doesn't seem very hopeful. But let's begin. Dobro pожаловать at the Wilson Center.
Thank you.
And I want to ask you, here's the TV question. The relationship, as we all know, is extremely bad right now. You would say it wasn't just Ukraine that pushed it over the edge. You would say that it goes back further. But I'm going to ask you a question in Russian, and I'll translate it very quickly, which is "Кто виноват?" And as some of you who speak Russian, you know, who's at fault, who's guilty? Let's start with that. Who is «Кто виноват»?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. As a professional Soviet diplomat, I prepared a long speech. But I was happy. I was happy to read it and said goodbye. But there said no speeches and only questions and answers. But I want to read only the first page, and after that I will try to answer to your.
That's fair.
Because you have to know what I wrote.
Absolutely.
And what I wrote, I said, let me start my brief introductory remarks with paying tribute to President Woodrow Wilson's dream of integrating politics, scholars, and policy for the common good. The Wilson Center serves as a spectacular manifestation of this dream coming true by providing a critical link between the world of ideas, the world of policy, by fostering research, study, discussion, and collaboration among a full spectrum of individuals concerned with policy and scholarship in world affairs. The model of the Wilson Center serves as a source of inspiration to all those who are trying not only to understand the complicated universe of international relations, but also to change it for the better. That's why I am here, and once again, thank you very much. I am now changed my job from official position to non-governmental organizations, and I don't know if it's more difficult it was before or now, because I am also want to study, not to teach, and that's why for me the experience of Wilson Center is very important. Now about your question, who is guilty? This is historically everybody making this question. I think that when I was minister and had problems, not with the United States, but in other international issues, all the time I was trying to start with myself. If I did, and as country, if we did everything well to avoid the problems, if we did everything well to to resolve the situation. That's why when you ask me who is guilty, I think that all sides are guilty. I think that all sides, because if you speak about Ukraine, we could manage the problem of Ukraine as it was necessary. Instead of trying to help to Ukraine, we started to push Ukraine to west or to east, saying you are with us or you will not stay. If you don't stay with us, then you cannot be member of European Union Association, European saying. And we are saying, if you are not with us, you cannot be the member of our integrating system, economic system, or custom union. It was big mistake from both sides. That's why, and this is not only this example of Ukraine. The same thing we had previously in different occasions. That's why when I said during our previous discussion that Ukraine was the last point demonstrating our mistakes. For me, it would be easier to say that mistakes were from the other side, and I can enumerate all the list of problems which we never understood well, or we thought that steps were made against the interests of Russia, starting with the enlargement of NATO, anti-missile defense, and so on and so far. But I think that also American side or European or Western side can reproach something to Russia. And I understand that. And how to avoid this situation? Only by dialogue, through dialogue, with mechanisms of understanding between both sides, because when you say you are unpredictable, if we don't speak, we don't understand well the reasons of the other side. If we don't understand, the suspensions appear. If you don't understand, then you may commit mistakes in your judgment or in your political, political steps. That's why I think that in the situation of today, which is, from my point of view, is one of the worst in our bilateral history, and not only after the Cold War, but I speak in general about the history of our bilateral relations. I think that we never had the situation when we don't speak. We don't have real channels of dialogue. We don't have dialogue on a political level, on the level of high level of different institutions, and without dialogue, how we think we can understand each other. And I think that today, that's why it's very important, the initiative of Wilson Center. Today, when on political level, for different reasons, it's not easy to restore quickly the dialogue, maybe non-governmental organizations, the civil society can play the role of restore the dialogue, of discuss all the issues. I think that there is no problem which we cannot discuss, and try to find some kind of understanding, and to avoid this tendency which unfortunately may create problems for everybody.
Minister Ivanov, you mentioned that everything is pretty much stalled, and every U.S. official that I speak with says basically nothing is happening in the relationship. The Presidential Commission is stalled, everything. You even mentioned NGOs. NGOs, as we all know, some of them are being shut down in Russia, et cetera. So let's look at the relationship. I guess the way I would put it is, how far is Russia willing to go to let that relationship deteriorate? In other words, is Russia prepared at this point to let the entire relationship blow up? Or are there some crucial issues that are so existential to Russia that Russia simply will not let them be destroyed, and that could be the way of finding some type of common cause or interest with the United States? What is essential?
Sometimes you can read or listen that Russia can live well without the United States, and in the United States saying that United States can live without Russia. And it's true. We can live, but what does it mean live well? We know that we have common problems. We can a lot of threats growing after the Cold War. All problems, regional and not only regional, they are growing without any solution. And it's clear that the international community needs cooperation and not to live in their own countries. That's why I think that I cannot agree with such statements that we can live well without each other. We need each other. I published this article. That's why this is not what I'm saying here. This is the U.S. and Russia need each other now more than ever, because this is what I consider, and we wanted to, and we demonstrated many times when we are together. We are trying to work. For example, after September 11th, we participated together in creating anti-terrorist coalition, and we worked very constructively together in Afghanistan and in other places cooperating against international terrorism. And I think that we gained together, and not only our countries. And many times after differences, when we cooperated, and the last, when people, for example, here and in my country also criticizing reset, I think that reset was good for both sides. It was good for both sides. Unfortunately, there were no continuation for different reasons, but why we gain with reset? We have new START agreement. Is it good or bad? It's good. We signed different agreements in different very important areas. The United States helped, supported the integration of Russia to WTO. It's good or bad? It's good. And I can enumerate. That's why reset was good. What was bad, that there were no continuation of reset. And I think that it's big mistake of politicians who think that we can live creating walls between our countries. You see that in Ukraine, you know, a stupid politician is also saying that instead of boat, we need to construct wall. This is not the 21st century style of life. Mm-hmm. We need to construct bridges and not walls. And what I want, I think that we have together, instead of discussing around the Ukraine, we have to work together to helping to Ukraine and to make Ukraine bridge between us and not new Berlin wall in Europe and between West and East.
Yes, but one of the problems in this town, as you know very, very well, is that there is a feeling, a theory, a belief that what Russia is doing in Ukraine is actually, you know, upending the international norms, the agreement between West and Russia after the Cold War. I mean, do you see any merit to that argument?
Well, if we speak about international norms and about international law, about international principles, after the Cold War, I don't know any principle created after the Cold War. If we take 10 principles of Helsinki Act, it was in 1975. And the international mainly law were established before, after the Second World War. That's why this is. I don't want to start to change the answer from Russia to other side and saying that it was not Russia who started to undermine the international law and principles. But for me, it's easy because as I told you, in my discussions, for example, during the Balkans War, what I was saying to my Western partners, including Americans, exactly what they are saying now to us about international law, about territorial integrity, about humanitarian intervention, about right to protect. All that principles, and including all 10 principles of Helsinki Act, were violated in several occasions. That's why this is not that you may justify other violations because somebody violated. This is the other story. But that's why, what does it mean? That you can say that you may do this, but the other side cannot do this. That's why what we need, when I started to saying, we need discussion about, open discussion about international big players or international community, about what international principles we are speaking, and about what implementation of such principles. If we speak about right of inviolability of borders or sovereignty, we have to agree between us what mean. We cannot use these principles in one region or in one country and don't use in the other. That's why all this, exactly what we see, that we need such a discussion, serious discussion on political level. I think that next year we have very important anniversaries. The anniversary of UN, of United Nations, 70th anniversary. We have 40th anniversary of Helsinki Final Act. It means this is when I think that this is an occasion to discuss among all of us what we need to do now in 21st century to reinforce that principles.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take something specific, speaking of principles, dealing with Ukraine. One of the principles that President Putin talks about is, in a sense, his responsibility to protect. His responsibility to protect Russian speakers in other countries, mostly in the former Soviet Union. But I think the essential question, now I don't know that anybody here knows the answer to it, and that is why there's so much concern, which is how far does that extend? I mean, does it extend to the Baltics? Does it extend to Central Asia? Does it extend to Brighton Beach, New York?
I don't think that in Brighton Beach there will be some people killing other people, innocent people, bombing cities as Donetsk and Lugansk, and I don't think so. And you have quite strong authority in the United States to protect these people.
But help us to understand,
what
is
but
this
coming back to responsibility to protect. This is very serious issue, and we started to speak about the responsibility to protect during the Balkans War. And after the Balkans War, with the in Africa, in many other places, and you know that in some countries the force was used. In Mali, for example, one of the last examples. That's why, if you see, and this is not what I am saying, but OSCE observers, they are there in Donetsk, in Lugansk, and they have clear evidence about disaster, what was happening there. That's why the responsibility to protect, I think that it's a reasonable measure to protect the people. The other question is who has to take and how to use that responsibility. Who is it has to be one country or organization, or who has to give to authorize to use this right. And this is what we have to discuss. The most simple answer would be the UN Security Council. But sometimes the UN Security Council is not very active and fun with taking urgent measures. That's why this is I don't think that you have to speculate that it can continue to Baltic countries, to other countries. I suppose that in Baltic countries there will be no such a violation as what is happening in Donetsk and Lugansk.
And which violation are you talking about?
Killing people, innocent people, children.
But do you?
You know how many people were killed in Donetsk and Lugansk?
Well, I've seen figures of 3,000 so far.
Around 3,000, and destroyed houses and destroyed infrastructure. Do you think that this is a humanitarian catastrophe or no?
Right, but if I know we're in theoretical territory here, but this principle of Russia's...
I remember in Kosovo, I was there, how many people were killed there as pretext to use military force of NATO bombing Yugoslavia. You cannot compare what happened in Kosovo with what is happening in Donetsk and Lugansk, unfortunately.
But let's take the violence that happened afterwards, take it out of the equation. Does Russia at this point believe that it would have a right to somehow intervene, and I'm not quite sure how you define that, but intervene in the Baltics to protect the rights of Russians who are living in those countries?
Today, this morning, I read in newspapers that pro-Russian party gained elections in Latvia. This is the best solution. You don't need it.
Political.
This is a political solution. Elections, they gained elections. This is now party number one in Latvia. Go to elections and let us see. That's why what we're asking, give them to Donetsk and Lugansk the possibility to vote and to decide their future. They want to respect their history, they want to respect their language. You see what is happening in Catalonia. Let us see what will be in November. What they want in Catalonia, they want to separate, to live separately from Spain. Now you will use missiles, you will use planes, you will use force to stop them. No, you will say, let us find political solution. That's why here you need also political solution.
Let's talk about sanctions. I mean, we'll go on to other subjects in Ukraine, but I think sanctions obviously are really crucial. And right now, the prospects for the Russian economy are not very good. I mean, this projected, 0.5% growth, basically flat growth projected. You have some capital flight, you have lack of investment coming in from the outside. How far is Russia willing to take its retaliatory measures, which seem aimed at, existing, you mentioned this in the beginning, existing by itself, because I have heard that there is dissension among Putin's inner circle about how Russia should deal with these sanctions?
Well, first of all, speaking about sanctions, sanctions is one of the measures according to the UN Charter. That's why sanctions theoretically are possible. Now, when they can be useful, this is the question. We have large experience of sanctions in different places of the world. For example, the United States used sanctions against Cuba for many years. Where we are. Fidel Castro is there, and his political regime also. That's why we have to define why you want to use and for what reason. We have one of the, from my point of view, not if we can say good example, is with case of Iran. We have political settlement, how to settle the issue of nuclear issue of Iran. We have political, very clear political package agreed between all main countries with the support of Security Council or UN Security Council. And our reason was of the international community to Iran, if you don't do this, we will need to adopt sanctions. But if you do this, the sanctions we will lift. That's why now we are in the positive process, and if everything goes well, maybe this year we will close this issue. It's very clear linkage between political settlement and sanctions. But when you introduce sanctions without clear political platform, then sanctions, you have also your different interpretation of the sanction. In the case of Russia, the pretext was if Russia play constructive role in the Ukrainian settlement. But any professional knows perfectly well there is no easy settlement, and not everything depends from Russia. It depends mainly from Ukrainians and not from Russia and from Russians. That's why if you say about settlement, it will be long process, and you may maintain sanctions for many years. That's why this is the political side of sanctions. From my point of view, in this case, the application of sanctions demonstrate the incapacity of political solution and lack of political dialogue. Economically speaking, it's not good for Russia, sanctions. This is not dramatic situation, it's not good. You are speaking about your figures, but you have figures in Europe, you have figures in many other countries. The world economy is not so good. That's why there will be problems. But I repeat, Russia is, if sanctions didn't work with small countries as Cuba, I don't think that they can work in a country as Russia with resources, with capacity, and with other. But it will be good. It will be bad for everybody. I repeat, I don't say that we don't suffer. We suffer from sanctions. It's clear. We suffer in mainly in financial area, in energy area, in the new technologies and modern technologies. They will create, but it doesn't mean that Russia cannot survive. Russia will survive, but I repeat, it will affect everybody. It will affect Russia, it will affect Europe, not so United States, but also some American companies.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you how concerned you are. There's talk now about Russia's nuclear capability that comes up a lot in the Russian sources that I'm reading. I was talking with one expert who said it's not inconceivable to this expert that Russia and the United States could be actually on the brink of war, which seems really shocking at this stage. How worried are you that the situation is that bad when it comes to nuclear disarmament?
I read the book of the memories of Marshal Akhrameyev, and he said that in '86 in headquarters,
Headquarters.
in headquarters of the Soviet Army, they analyzed different possibilities to use nuclear weapon, and they come to a conclusion that it was impossible to use nuclear weapon. That's why they proposed to Gorbachev support the idea of elimination of nuclear weapons. And I think that if it was impossible to use nuclear weapon at that period, at that time, I think that today it's also impossible. I think that this is a speculation for different reasons here and elsewhere, that nuclear weapon can be used. I don't see any possibility, because nobody wants to be killed. If you use nuclear weapon, it's clear that you will receive the answer immediately with all consequences.
Well, then let's turn it toward progress toward nuclear disarmament. I mean, the INF Treaty, up for discussion. It would appear that that's part of the relationship that's stalled as well.
I think that one of the main and very important strategic interests of both countries is to restore the dialogue on on reduction of nuclear strategic weapons. Because if we really want stability, and if we really want to guarantee non-proliferation regimes in the world, in countries, we need to have dialogue among us. Because if we don't have dialogue, we have less possibility to ask other countries not to develop their nuclear projects. That's why it's important for both countries, and it's important for international stability.
You know, I wanted to ask
And
you.
all during the Soviet period, even during the Cold War, our negotiations on strategic weapons were one of the stone bases of our relations, defining the long-term interests. And now I don't see any reason why we don't speak about this issue.
You were talking about young people in Russia, and kind of a disturbing thing, a growing anti-Americanism among younger Russians, you know, that generation, let's say in their 30s, maybe their 20s, whereas the people who are in their 40s or 50s tend to be more positive toward the United States. It sounded like a very disturbing trend. I've read about it myself. Tell me, you know, and our participants here, what's happening? Why do you think there is this growing anger, whatever it is, against the United States?
Maybe it would be better to ask somebody younger than myself.
Well, we can put yourself in their boots.
Sometimes I don't understand my children, that's why. But I can tell you that and this is what is true, because I participated in that events. After September 11th, the sympathy towards the United States was very high. Never it was so high as it was after September 11th. It was real solidarity. It was a real sentiments of support of the American people, and I think that it was very impressive and very important. And sometimes I ask myself how in quite short period there may be some so dramatic changes in the attitude. And I think that sometimes this is the first point, as in many other situations, is not understanding well the other side. Sometimes the impression among young people is that Americans want to be Superman, to teach everybody, and young generations, they don't like it, and they teach. You have to explain, but not to teach and not to impose something. They want their model of life, their style of life, their understanding. And the curious situation is that many young people in university, in my university also, they are thinking to find an interesting job outside the country. But many of them now, not in the United States, but in other places, in Europe or in China or some other places, because maybe this is wrong perception about the American style of life. That's why also, because we don't have enough exchanges, enough contacts, maybe this is also the problem.
And one exchange was just ended by Russia, unfortunately.
Yes, unfortunately, I agree, unfortunately.
You mentioned 9/11, which kind of got me thinking about terrorism and ISIS/ISIL. Where do you see any type of cooperation with the United States or the West, the world community actually, in fighting ISIS, the terrorist organization?
We had long discussions with our American partners about our cooperation. And sometimes my colleagues were saying, well, we have to define several points where we have interest in cooperate with you. And as usual, mentioning Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and one, two more points. And what I was saying and believing that you cannot, in foreign policy, you cannot select, here I have interest and here I don't have interest. Here we can cooperate and here we will not cooperate. If you have high level of political understanding, you will cooperate where you have mutual interests. That today you have not only some American visitors, but also European visitors from Great Britain come and say, today the main problem is the Islamic Republic of Iraq and Levante. And if we start to cooperate here, we shall easily restore the trust, and you will see how well we will work in other areas. This is not true. This is not true. It's easy to destroy, but not to restore the trust. And we know very well. That's why we need the continuation in our cooperation. That's why, if you ask me how to start, it's necessary for the first of all, we have to, on the political level, to decide. We need each other. We need cooperation on political level. If you don't have such a decision on political and high political level, you cannot cooperate and you cannot do anything in other areas. After political, we need strategical understanding, where the big areas and the area of disarmament, area of other modern threats and challenges, including terrorism, including drugs, including many other. We know all our problems. We have the list. We agreed between us the list of threats, 10 or 12, I don't remember. 1, 2, 3, 4. We know what problems we have. We know what threats we have. This is nothing secret, state secret. But the problem is we need to create mechanisms of cooperation, working together. This is what we don't have. And to have this, we need political will and political decision. Nothing to do with elections here or with elections in Russia. This is long-term strategical interest, independently who may gain elections.
You know, you made a very interesting comment just a few minutes ago when we were at lunch, where you said that, you know, the impression right now is that things really went south after Ukraine. Ukraine is basically the reason that everything is falling apart. But you actually said that it was one in a series, that this has been coming for a while. Could you explain to the people here, what do you mean by that?
Well, as I said to my good friend Ambassador Collins, I think that our common mistake was thinking that Cold War was over and everything, all problems were settled. After the Cold War, we never had serious negotiations about our strategic basis or basis of our strategic cooperation in new era after the Cold War in the 21st century. That's why we never created real mechanisms. We created something. It was Gor-Chernomyrdin, for example, commission, or presidential commission, some working groups, but it was mechanism, not principles. We never defined our common interest. For example, we are saying yes, because between the United States and China, they maintain relations because they have a lot of economic interest. Yes, we cannot have such interest for different reasons. Our commerce is very small, but we have strategic interest in many other important areas where you don't have the United States so strong interest with the United States. Mainly starting with nuclear balance and the interest of strategic nuclear issue. In the struggle against terrorism, cooperation in the settlement of important regional conflicts. You see what is happening in Middle East, in Afghanistan, in many other places. We have a lot of areas to work together. That's why, but unfortunately, I repeat, without creating such a strong basis for our cooperation, we started to fail in different areas. We failed in Caucasus, we failed with enlargement of NATO, with anti-missile defense, and the last point was Ukraine. That's why, if we understand well that it's necessary to change the direction of our relations, Ukraine, we have to study the lessons of Ukraine crisis. And to study lessons means we have to sit together and help to Ukrainians resolve their problem, their crisis. And only helping them to resolve, we will start new kind of dialogue. And we shall understand how to work in such a critical situation. And the continuation will be in Middle East or in other places where you want. But if we don't do so, the Ukrainian crisis will be all the time the problem which will undermine our trust and our cooperation.
You know, you mentioned China. A couple of seconds on China. I'd like, and we're going to get to questions very soon, but just a China question. In the context of Ukraine, you hear a lot of this, you know, the West is pushing us toward Asia, and the answer to Western sanctions is China. That at least is what I'm hearing from a number of Russian sources or the Russian media. Is there a, let's say, a pivot, the way the United States talks about a pivot to Asia, a serious one, or is this running to China to try to have an answer to the sanctions, with the danger that China might just use Russia as a source of raw materials and not really, its economy is so much bigger than Russia's?
I don't know your sources in Moscow. But if you
Oh, there are open sources.
But if you ask me, I will tell you. In 2000, the first, the President Putin, who was elected, he signed the concept of Russian foreign policy. And in concept of Russian foreign policy of 2000, we said that we want multilateral foreign policy. We want equal relations with West and with East, because Russia is Euro-Asia state. We need good relations with European Union. We need good relations with Asian countries. That's why we started to engage with all big Asia Pacific organizations, and also we're trying to create, to construct our relations with European Union. You cannot, the foreign policy, I'm not businessman, but maybe here you have business people, it's not easy to change from right to left immediately in business, in foreign policy too. That's why you cannot change if you sell oil and gas to Europe, you cannot change the direction immediately to China or to other Asian countries. And I personally think that if somebody thinks so, it's a big mistake. Because if you don't have strong relations with the West, it will be more difficult to have strong position in the East. That's why you need a good position with West to have a strong negotiation position with the East. That's why this is very simple, and I'm sure that this is the interests of Russia.
You know, maybe now is the time we could open it to questions. We have, I guess, about a half hour, a little bit more, for questions. And I think we have some microphones, at least I think we do. There they are. Yes, sir. I think you're the first one to raise your hand. And if you would please identify yourself and actually ask a question.
Right.
Be to the point.
Yes, Stuart Rosenblatt. I work with EIR. My questions actually follow up on what you were just leading to, which is there's a new phenomenon, I think in the world, the BRICS development, Brazil, Russia, India, China, et cetera. Big conference this summer. There's going to be a meeting next week between the prime ministers of China and Russia, 30 trade agreements, big ones, I think, on energy, rail, et cetera. Two questions on that. One, what do you think about the BRICS development as a development approach to get the world out of this crisis? And secondly, would you suggest or propose to the government that the United States be invited to join BRICS and leave the kind of dying IMF system?
You want me to answer now?
Yes, I think now we're going to open up to questions from the audience.
Okay. First of all, I think that the 21st century is the century of multilateral organizations. And I'm sure that you know the history of BRICS. We started with Russia, China. It was during my period when we invited India. We wanted, as Russia, to help to the normalization relations between India and China. And we started on the level of ministers of foreign affairs. After that, the level was higher on the level of the presidents during the General Assembly of United Nations. And it's clear that when you start the dialogue, you start to speak about different areas. The first area was coordination in international affairs. And after that, also we started to speak about possible economic cooperation, mainly in the region of Far East and Siberia. And then other countries, seeing the possibility and the capacity of this structure, decided to join. This is, as you know, the organization it's not formal organization, it's an organization of countries who has the common interests in different areas. About the United States, I don't think so, because the countries of BRICS, they consider developing countries, and the United States is a super developed country. That's why I don't think that this is the good company for them to stay, but this is, I don't know, maybe there will be in some time different opinion, but let us see what they can do. What can I assure you that this is not, as some people say here, against somebody, against the American or against West, against the contradiction. This is not true. I think that that countries, for different reasons, they have common interests. With some countries, there will be more possibility, for example, with China, because we have a long border, we have common interests, and then with India, with South Africa, I don't know, there is some projects, but not so active. That's why there will be not the similar level of cooperation. But I think that it's good. The other thing, I will tell you my personal opinion, why you see more and more ad hoc organizations. Maybe because we have very slow reform of UN system. All that countries, they wanted to be members of members of Security Council. Brazil, India, South Africa, all of them, they pretended to be members. And as they don't see the possibility, because the reform is very slow, they create different other structures to have influence on the international affairs or other international problems where they have interests and they want to have their voice. That's why also it will go in parallel with, from my point of view, with the more active reforms of UN system.
You know, I have to apologize. I have to jump in, and this question may come up, but it leads right into the customs union, Russia's customs union. And there is a theory that the customs union is basically reconstituting the Soviet Union. Set us straight, is it?
Well, I don't know. Again, you are speaking about theories. Tell me your sources, because
Well, I think a lot of them are right here in Washington, D.C.
Strange sources about because look, first of all, you may, if you want, you cannot reconstruct Soviet Union. The problem is that new countries which appeared after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, they're very proud of their independence and they want to be independent countries. You may like it or don't like it. That's why I think that it was a mistake of some people in Moscow saying, you are small brothers. No, they are not small brothers. They are equal brothers or equal participants of international relations. That's why it's impossible. First of all, if you see the custom union, it's economic organization. It's not political organization. What I was trying to explain to European Union when I was, that's why to avoid such ideas, what they need to establish relations with custom union, and then everything will be clear. their interests, their ideas, and it's, I repeat, it's economic organization. Now you ask me why you need custom union. And I can ask you why you need common market with European Union. It's clear that it's the time of integration and not disintegration. All countries, they want to have more markets, more space for their economy. That's why also why Russia, who has on one side Kazakhstan, on the other side Belarus, why Russia cannot have custom union. This is normal tendency in the economic development of modern world, nothing else. And to understand this, you have to work to cooperate with this, that structures, and then you will know exactly about what we are speaking.
Okay, so back to questions. Sir?
What is Russia's view of
Wait for the microphone, please, and if you would identify yourself first.
I'm Jeff Bouvier. I'm a retired EPA scientist. What is Russia's cooperation with China over solving the North Korean situation?
Well, we have the same final intention to have Korean Peninsula without nuclear weapons. This nuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We cooperate on a bilateral level and in the framework of 6 countries working together. It's clear that unfortunately still we are in the process, but our cooperation is very clear in this area. We want to reach. We are working, we are trying to do what we can. It's not easy. It's not easy to speak with North Korean leaders. I had experience with previous 2 leaders. With the last one, I never had any contact, but it's not easy. But I think that it was good that we created group of 6. And it's very important to restore the work of this group, because only working in 6, we speak with one voice. It's not enough to China separately, Russia separately. We need the voice of the United States, of South Korea, of Japan, of all countries interested in this area. And I think that it is possible because there are some kind of positive movements. The main thing is not to block that positive movements as it was before.
Yes, sir, there's a man right, yes, with your arm right there. Yes, in the blue shirt. Green blue shirt.
Igor Sergeyevich, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. My name is John Pierce. I'm a student at the George Washington University. You mentioned earlier in the context of the former Yugoslav conflict that people in the West were telling you what you are telling people in the West today in regards to Ukraine. Why do you think what you were saying in 1994 doesn't apply in 2014?
Well, I compared with Yugoslavia with only one reason, trying to give example that the violation cannot be accepted in one case and not accepted in the other case. If we don't have the continuity, if we don't have the same rules of game for everybody, there will be chaos and there will be violation as it is. Now about the agreement of 1994, which was agreed between the countries. It was to give guarantee of the country, of their security. And I think that today nobody want to undermine the security of Ukraine. It means it was, if you remember, it was related with nuclear weapons. It means if Ukraine having nuclear weapons, maybe this crisis would be more dangerous for Europe and for everybody than Ukraine without nuclear weapons. Because when you have irresponsible politicians, a nuclear weapon in hands of irresponsible politicians is very dangerous. That's why I think that this is political speculations of some Ukrainian politicians saying maybe we will create again nuclear weapon and then we will be stronger. It's not so. They need political settlement and political solution, and Russia is ready to help. But my opinion is, I agree when we spoke about Minsk group. I think that Russia alone cannot help to Ukraine, and I will tell you why. Because we have so high level of mistrust between all of us that anything what Russia may do will be presented in other countries as something against the interests of Ukraine. And Russia also doesn't trust West countries, thinking that everything what Western countries are doing in Ukraine is against Russian interests. That's why only contact group sitting together, as we were doing with the case of Iran or with the case of South Korea nuclear program, or in Middle East Quartet, if we sit together and we prepare a roadmap for Ukraine, how to settle political stability, economic issues, language, constitutional reforms, all other issues which we need, and we will help to Ukrainians to implement such a roadmap, then we can first of all help to Ukrainians, and the second help us to restore some kind of dialogue and trust.
Mm-hmm. There's a question down here, second row. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Honorable. My name is James Chung. I'm an independent scholar here. I'm holding this book. I'm reviewing it. And in the foreword, and Henry Kissinger said that there's a rare opportunity for the two countries, I mean U.S. and Russia, to develop the new international order. But when I read this again, and I didn't see anything happening that way, and so how much do you think that the world is developing the way are you predicting, or Dr. Kissinger predicting? If anything new in the international order, and as some scholars said, there's a Russia-China axis. How do you comment on that? Thank you.
Well, some people say about Russia and China, some people about new bipolar system, American-Chinese system. I don't know. This is what I can assure you. First of all, that unfortunately, international community didn't do a job to create principles of foundations of new world order. That's why we have this order. Second, what we know that there will be no unipolar world. This is we know we failed. We know that there will be no bipolar world. This is the history. It has to be, I don't like a multipolar world, but I was one of the who created such a definition as multipolar, but we never developed what does it mean multipolar world, about what powers we are speaking, the coordination between them. This is long, in the other book I wrote about this, not in this book, but unfortunately we only now understand how big problems we have among us without new understanding in what world we have to live. We started to put under the question international organizations, including UN, international law. Not only you may blame Russia, but I can blame other countries. All of us, international community in general, participated in these destructive exercises. That's why I think that we have now, with what is happening in Middle East, what is happening in other regions, to understand. We need to sit and we have to start. And next year, maybe it will be good year when we will celebrate 70 years after the victory in the Second World War, where we were allied and participated together, and after war created UN system. Maybe now we have to understand we have the same challenges, the same problems, we have danger for all of us, and we need to unite our forces to create this new world order. How it will be, I don't know. It's clear that we need principles. We need respect to the principles. We need to respect the international law. We have to create multilateral, I said, This is the century of multilateral mechanisms. Only together. We cannot impose. Look, during the Cold War, it was easier to impose in the Middle East. It was possible. The United States and the Soviet Union, they can stop the war in only speaking by phone. Kissinger with his, and Gromyko, and deciding how to stop. Today, who is listening? Israel is listening the United States, or Arab are listening Russia or somebody. Nobody listening, nobody. That's why it's necessary to create totally new system where everybody will participate, will respect the order, and will work together. It's not easy, I understand. Maybe you will think that I am something in the other world. Not in this world. I don't see any other possibility for all of us to avoid the more difficult period if we don't start this work.
Mm-hmm. And a question from Matt Rajansky, who happens to be the head of the Kennan Institute.
So you already introduced me. Thank you, Jill. Igor Sergeyevich. Есть мнение, as they say, there's an opinion that oftentimes the reason why we can't get started on this approach to a new system, to a new type of dialogue, to putting our trust in a new set of rules, is fear, is deep, latent insecurity. My question is, when it comes to the countries, particularly on Russia's periphery, and we know from the latest crisis in Ukraine, but others, those are often the locuses of the biggest problems for Russia's relations with the West. Why do you think that there is so much fear of Russia? And is that fear justified?
During the Soviet period, when somebody saying there is opinion, very high level. I don't know where is your opinion on the very high level or not, but maybe there is opinion. I will tell you. In 90s, Russia was struggling to survive. It was, we never had at that moment capacity to create problems for anybody. But in 90s, NATO started the process of enlargement. It means that it was not fear. It was a speculations about fear. What fear had Czech Republic or Hungary or Poland? What fear? It was the intention to enter NATO as the first step to be members of European Union. And other countries so on. You are coming to Baltic countries. It was also the same issue. Baltic countries, what fear they had. They are members of NATO. Okay. You have the Article 5. Fear, what fear? Russia is a stupid country to start the Third World War? I think that mainly they are trying to let us see. I said about the results of elections in Latvia. I think that they have also reasonable people. They wanted to gain with this, creating this impression of Russian threat. Russian threat what? I will tell you. In Latvia, you know perfectly well, 30% of the population without nationality. I was speaking with European Union. I was speaking with OSCE. I was speaking with Council of Europe. Please, do you think that this is acceptable? What is the reason? Why they don't have nationality? Because they are not from Latvia, but this is not their problem. They all their life they are living there because they are Russians only. And I said, we don't want to impose them our condition. Please impose them only the rules of Council of Europe, the rules of OSCE, and nothing else. And then there is no problem. That's why this is what we have to discuss. Normally, there will be no threat and no. But when it's easy to say, this is the threat of Russia. Threat what? We need multi-countries. We have a lot of territories, I can assure you. Why we need more small 3 republics? We don't know what to do with Siberia. We have only 6 or 7 million people, and we don't know how to develop that big region. That's why I don't think that. We need dialogue, we need sit together, and then you will see that everything is possible.
There's a woman back, yes.
Thank you. Ava Spolin, retired American diplomat. Mr. Minister, you said that, if I understood you correctly, that without a sort of strategic framework and agreement on political principles, there's not much point in talking about smaller issues, because these don't really lead to dialogue. But apropos of that, and also your last comments, do you think it's really possible for us to agree on a set of principles? I think there are so many differences in the way we view the world, and what we think is permissible and not permissible. To start with NATO, whether it's a threat to Russia or not. And isn't it sometimes better to start with the small issues? I remember in the Soviet period, we spent a lot of time thinking about what are the small issues we can discuss, because we're never going to agree on the big ones.
If I say no, it means we have to say that our generation is stupid. If it was possible in 1975 sign Helsinki Agreement during the Cold War period, and it was possible to agree 10 principles, 10 important principles of stability in Europe, why we cannot do it now? What is the reason? At that moment, we have total incompatibility between our systems. We have 2 military political blocs preparing the nuclear strike against each other. And during the Cold War, we signed Helsinki Agreement on the highest level with the 10 principles. That's why I think that if somebody says today it's more difficult than it was at that moment, this is only to avoid from the work and only to cover incapacity of that people to. I am sure that it is possible. I am sure that it is possible. And the other example which I can give you is that after the war in Yugoslavia, then NATO bombed Yugoslavia. In 2 years, we agreed with between Russia and NATO, creation of Russia-NATO Council. And if you read the paper of the statement of it was ratified by all NATO countries and by Russia. And we agreed principles also how to cooperate between NATO and Russia. Unfortunately, we failed with that cooperation later, but we agreed the principles. That's why it is possible. The main thing is not agreeing principles. The main thing to agree how to apply, how to implement that principles. And this is the everyday job, and not only to sit and to sign beautiful documents.
Question down in the front. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Omar Ulumi. I'm from Afghanistan, and here I'm a Rumsfeld Foundation Fellow. My question is, Minister, how do you assess the security situation in the region when the NATO combat operation ends by the end of this year? While we clearly see that the Taliban are not completely dismantled, we have ISS or /ISL in race, and we recently see Khorasan coming up. How do you see the region will cope with all these security concerns? Thank you.
Well, the topic of our meeting was Russia and U.S. Is a real partnership still possible? I think that if we have partnership, real partnership, it will be also important for the stability in the region. Because for different reasons, it's important for the United States, but not less for Russia's security. situation. And we cooperated quite well in during different period. It was during the period of Taliban and after September 11th. It means that's why we helped NATO and American troops to receive transit of weapons through Russian territories, because it's in our interest. Even without dialogue, we were helping American troops in Afghanistan. This is the demonstration of understanding the real situation and how we have to cooperate. Unfortunately, as I said before, you cannot select one point and say, here the cooperation is okay, here we cannot cooperate. Here I trust you, here I don't trust you. You know, as normal people, if I trust you in everything. And I cannot trust you today, and tomorrow I don't trust you, and the next day again. That's why I think that the future of Afghanistan will depend mainly from international cooperation. India has interest, China have interest, all regional countries. We had, as you remember, the group of 8, the border countries and the main other players, working very closely. With Iran also it's necessary to work. It means we all of that countries who has the real interest and capacity and possibility, we have to cooperate. And if we cooperate, we can avoid the negative consequences. If not, there will be again, you know what there will be. You are from there, I am not from there.
Mm-hmm. Gentleman here, and then there's one in the back, I believe, a little bright, but let's start with this gentleman here, in the middle, right there, yes.
Thank you. Valery Kovalevsky, Center for the Initiative on Belarus. As a Belarusian, I was delighted to hear your call to respect independence of former Soviet Union countries. At the same time, since the end of the Cold War, Russia insisted that it has the right for privileged interests in these countries of the former Soviet Union. Can you please specify what exactly does this mean, privileged interest? And could it be the reason why Ukrainian crisis has started, that Russia wanted to employ some kind of veto power over decisions on national development of Ukraine? Thank you.
Look, I am a professional diplomat, 40 years of my experience, and I know how to read papers, and I know how to read statements. Give me one statement. I was minister for 4 years, then I was 3 years Secretary of Security Council. Give me one statement, my statement, speaking about some privileged interests of Russia in that countries. If you give me, I will answer you, but you cannot give me. This is, you read in mass media, in press. Let us use statements, documents, and then I will answer you. We don't have any privileged interests in that countries. We have to respect. I ratified personally, I was presenting in Duma the so-called big treaty among Russia and Ukraine, saying that we are equal players of in international arena. Only equal on the basis of equality, of equal rights, we can construct new kind of relations. And I think that we, with Belarus, we are trying to give such example. That's why I think that if you ask me, in theory, we don't have any privileged interests. We have national interests. This is true. This is different. National interests and privileged interests. National interests because we have common border. It's clear that we have more interests, national interests there than many European countries or even the United States, because we have the common history, we have the common recent history, we have common economic interest, we have common security interest, we have common humanitarian interest because many families they are living there and here. That's why we have national interests, and we recognize it. But national interests and privileged interests, this is big difference, as we say in Odessa.
But so that's what explains why Russia is worried about NATO on the border. You're saying it's not a privileged interest in those countries, but you are worried about your own strategic, defense interests in that region along that border. Is that correct?
Look, we started to speak with NATO during the first enlargement, and I was speaking with 4 Secretary Generals of NATO, with Robertson, with Solana, with Schäfer, with with last one I didn't speak, but trying to understand what is the policy of NATO, of the enlargement of NATO. What is the policy of the enlargement of NATO? If I don't understand your policy, I cannot believe you, because I suspect, I mistrust you, because if you don't explain me what is the reason. I told you before, this is not political organization. We were not against the enlargement of European Union. This is economic organization, and each country decide in what economic system they want to be. But NATO is not political organization, it's military organization. And if it's military organization, the enlargement, it means that you want to assure your security. And if you have enlargement towards Russia, it means security is coming from Russia. In political documents, they put NATO. Russia is not enemy for NATO, but the enlargement is coming to NATO, to Russian borders. Where is the logic of these decisions? That's why we created the Russia-NATO Council precisely not to stop the enlargement, because we understood it was clear that it was not our possibility to stop the enlargement, but we wanted to create new mechanisms trying to say, let us sit together. What was the Russia-NATO Council? All countries in national capacity. It was not NATO countries and Russia, but it was countries, each country in national capacity, sitting around the table, discussing common problems and trying to find common solutions. But unfortunately, we failed.
Okay, so we have about 8-9 minutes to go. Let's get the gentleman in the back who's been waiting patiently, and then we'll move to the front. And if you would identify yourself, thanks.
Dick Rosen with the Council for a Community of Democracies. Mr. Minister, in your remarks, you said we should study the lessons of Ukraine. The president of Ukraine, Poroshenko, has studied those problems, and he thinks the solution is to correct a situation which is politically corrupt. That kind of reform, is it the basis for a partnership between Russia and the United States in advancing it? Or, to return to Mr. Rodzansky's question, do the Russians fear such reform?
Reform.
What said Poroshenko?
I'm not quite sure I understand that either of us understands the question. Reform in Ukraine, that Poroshenko is talking about reform in Ukraine? Yes. And the question is, that would be the basis for some type of cooperation?
Well,
if you want to
I didn't listen the speech of Poroshenko in the Congress. That's why maybe I don't know details of his plan of settlement. But you spoke about corruption. Yes or no? Yes. About corruption. Well, corruption, I think that is one of the problems which was reason of explosion in Maidan 1 year ago. That's why it's clear that you have to, corruption is one of the problems. But I think that Ukraine, it's not only problem of Ukraine, the corruption. Corruption is one of the main problems, but unfortunately, for different reasons, after the disintegration of the Soviet Union and creation of the Ukraine as an independent state, not only corruption, but the principal pillars of democracy, of democratic country were not created. Institutions, parliament, judicial system, and other economic system. That's why I don't think that it's so easy to say only with corruption. First of all, if you don't have the whole system, you cannot struggle against corruption. To battle corruption, you need institutions. Without institutions, you cannot battle corruption. That's why when I said before, we need the whole roadmap which we can propose or elaborate with Ukrainians, not without Ukrainians, but with Ukrainians, and help them, political, economic, social, and also including corruption. And this is the big job for many years. This is not, you cannot battle corruption in 1 year. It's quite difficult in the society of Ukraine which exists today.
We have time for about 2 more questions, so let's do the gentleman who's right there in the middle, standing up, and then we're going to come down here.
Thank you. My name is David Nikoradze. I represent Georgian television station Rustavito in Washington, D.C. Minister, let me remind you of the statement about privileged interest appeared in August 2008 when started military confrontation against Georgia. And my question is about Russia-Georgia relations. How do you see these relations in the future when country already signed association agreement with the European Union and governments declared policies to join NATO one day? Thanks, sir.
Well, I read with satisfaction the statement of Georgian Prime Minister in New York during the General Assembly of United Nations that the policy of Tbilisi of Georgia is to step-by-step normalization of relations with Russia. I think that this is the same attitude from Moscow, and if we go, it's clear that we have problems, we have history, and we need from both sides work to restore the normal relations between our 2 states. I think that it is possible. We have a lot of we have good and important history, long history among our people, among our cultures, and I think that moving ahead with this political will, I think that the normalization will be, it is possible, but it will need time.
Okay, and I think this will be our last question down here. Audrey, one of the fellows here at the Wilson Center.
Thanks. My name's Audrey Alstead. I'm one of the fellows at the Wilson Center this year. I'd like to return to the question about the right to protect. And my question specifically is what Russia's policy in particular is on right to protect, if it construes it as being appropriate to intervene when cultural rights are being threatened, whether an existential threat would have to be present. In other words, Russia's policy and the way it construes the idea of right to protect. Thanks.
Well, I think that for the first time we started to speak about this when the military force was used against civil population. And I don't think that we can today define in all details when you can use this right or when you don't use this right, but it was the real violation of human rights with killing civil population, and it was considered important to use this right. How it can be used in other occasions, I don't think that today I can or somebody can define exactly. I don't think that you can use that right it's not norm, but it has to be something exceptional. And that in Ukraine we had exceptional situation, and that right was used.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, which reminds us that a lot has not been defined in this area, but I really want to thank you very much, Igor Sergeyevich, for a wonderful explanation. It's very rare that we get the view from Moscow directly, and I'm very appreciative.
This is not view from Moscow. I'm
Well,
not
I'm
official.
sorry.
This is my personal view.
official.
That's why I don't think that everybody in Moscow agree with
I would, in fact, that's true. I mean, do you feel
That's why-
lonely? Do you feel lonely with your position?
No, I don't know. Maybe.
But thank you very much. It is definitely not an official, but it's a very educated opinion based on years of stellar diplomacy. And thank you very, very much.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.